And today we're joined by a special guest who's just written a book. The United States is on the road to becoming a fascist society, right under our very noses. That's the premise of the new book by feminist social critic Naomi Wolf. It's called The End of America, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. And it's already on the New York Times bestseller list. Naomi Wolf outlines what she sees as the 10 steps to shut down a democratic society. She argues the Bush administration has already implemented many of these steps. Naomi Wolf is the author of several books, including the 90s feminist classic, The Beauty Myth. Critics describe her latest book, The End of America, as a wake-up call to Americans to heed the lessons of history and fight to save their democracy before it's too late. Naomi Wolf joins us in our Firehouse studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy.
It's good to have you with us. Start off with the stories that you tell in your book.
Well, they're the stories of societies that were systematically closed down by would-be despots, would-be dictators, whether they were on the left or the right, who essentially developed a blueprint in the first part of the 20th century to crush democracies or to crush democracy movements. So there are also individual stories of how people react as a democracy is being closed down. But I guess the book really began with a very personal story because I was forced to write it, even though I didn't really want to, by a dear friend who is a Holocaust survivor's daughter. And when we spoke about news events, she kept saying, they did this in Germany, they did this in Germany, and I really didn't think that made sense. I thought that was very extreme language. But finally she forced me to sit down and start reading the histories, of course, not of the later years, because she wasn't talking about German outcomes, 38, 39. She was talking about the early years, 1930, 31, 32, when Germany was a parliamentary democracy, and there was this systematic assault using the rule of law to subvert the rule of law. And once I saw how many parallels there were, not just in strategy and tactics, but that we're seeing again today, but actually in images and sound bites and language, then I read other histories of Italy in the 20s, Russia in the 30s, East Germany in the 50s, Czechoslovakia in the 60s, Pinochet's coup in Chile in 73, the crushing of the democracy movement in China at the end of the 80s. And I saw that there is a blueprint that would-be dictators always do the same 10 things, whether they're on the left or the right, and that we are seeing these 10 steps taking place systematically right now in the United States.
Lay them out.
Well, they're not happy. The first step is that all would-be dictators or would-be despots, which is what the founders of our country who foresaw exactly this kind of possibility would call them, all would-be dictators invoke a terrifying internal and external threat. And often it's a real threat, which they will hyper-manipulate. For instance, Stalin spoke about sleeper cells, which is one of those phrases that are being sort of recirculated now by the Bush White House. And this was an invention. He said there were capitalist secret agents who were hiding among good Soviet citizens and who were going to rise up at a signal and create terrorist mayhem. Fake story, but it worked to frighten citizens. Pinochet talked about a real threat, armed insurgents. There were armed insurgents, but he hyped it using fake documents, and we see this a lot in the historical blueprint that a would-be dictator will fake documents. His were called Plan Z. He claimed they were going to bomb infrastructure, assassinate leaders. We saw fake documents used by the White House to hype a terror threat when they used the fake yellow cake documents to claim that Iraq was trying to secure yellow cake uranium. And remember the famous soundbite, we can't wait for the smoking gun to come in the form of a mushroom cloud to drive us into an illegal war with a nation we were not at war with.
You also talk about the language, like the Department of Homeland Security.
That is where I, as a social critic and a student of language, get really scared. It's scary enough to see these 10 steps, but what is terrifying to me personally is how many actual phrases are being recycled and tactics. Homeland Security, Heimat, became popularized by the National Socialists. Goebbels developed the practice of embedding journalists. Leigh von Riefenstahl was embedded, for instance, in Poland, and we're seeing
She's the famous German filmmaker.
If you look at the sequence of Hitler descending in an airplane and von Riefenstahl's famous triumph of the will and being greeted by the uniformly armed paramilitary sort of surrounding their leader, and him saying, help us accomplish our mission. And then you look at other famous images from this administration.
Like George Bush on
Mission accomplished. Exactly right. You look at how, Hitler said we have to invade Czechoslovakia because they're a staging ground for terrorists, and they're abusing their ethnic minorities. Again, a country they were not at war with. When the WMD charge vanished, the White House said we have to invade Iraq because they're a staging ground for terrorists and they're abusing their ethnic minorities. On and on and on. I mean, this one scares me to death. You know, the Mussolini developed, again, a parliamentary democracy. Italy was in the teens and into 1920. He developed the black shirts, which were these paramilitary thugs that beat up newspaper editors, terrorized the population, and they intimidated people counting the vote in Milan. And then Hitler studied Mussolini, so many things were repeated by Hitler. Stalin studied Hitler, Hitler studied Stalin. But Hitler developed the brown shirts, the SA, who intimidated people counting the vote in Austria. So 90% of them voted for their own annexation because there were the brown shirts. And you saw this scene of identically dressed Republican staffers in Florida in 2000, intimidating people counting the vote. So things like that are really chilling. And they're more and more chilling as I think right now people are kind of ramping up their awareness of these echoes. And what you also see predictively, because the blueprint is predictive, is that the White House is ramping up its implementation of some of the scariest aspects of this crackdown.
You began with these stories back in the summer of 2006 of headlines from a 2-week period. Give some of those examples.
Well, 2006 seems so long ago and so innocent a time, considering how swiftly we've zoomed along implementing this blueprint, or we're suffering this implementation. In 2006, a blogger was jailed in San Francisco. In 2006, people in Alabama couldn't get a fair hearing for protecting voter rolls. There was the beginning of the Military Commissions Act of 2006, in which the state basically legalized torture, which is one of these crucial turning points as an open society closes down.
You talk about Christine Axsmith, the computer security expert working for the CIA, who posted a message on a blog site on a top secret computer network criticizing waterboarding, saying waterboarding is torture and torture is wrong.
And then she lost her security clearance. She's one of many, many whistleblowers, key individuals who have tried to take a stand against some of these positions and who have faced, again, in a closing society, this is what happens. This is step 7, target key individuals. They faced job loss, character assassination, or worse. Valerie Plame's bolts were taken away from her back deck, 50 feet off the ground. She has 2 toddlers. People are being put on the watch list for criticizing the government, for engaging in anti-war protest. Their kids are being put on the watch list. But yeah, back then, all she said was, it's wrong. And now we've just confirmed an attorney general who pretends not to know what waterboarding is, because if he acknowledged that it's against U.S. and international law, he'd be confirming the fact that there are criminals in the White House right now who have already stated